Good afternoon. Welcome to Common Talk here on IntellectualRadio.com. I'm your host, J Jack. I have with me a special guest, a dear friend, longtime friend. We've been going back for over 30 years. We're aging ourselves, but I want to introduce Dr. Leonard Forte. Dr. Leonard Forte is an educational expert and also a gospel expert. We're going to talk more about the educational aspect of things today. How you doing today, Doc?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule. Seems like now that you're retired, you're busier than ever.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but you're looking good, man, and God has continued to bless you, and glad to have you.
Thank you.
So let's start off. Tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and so that folks get a chance to know you. And also, Dr. Forte is going to be a regular guest on the show, and we're going to talk about a myriad of topics. So he's not just an expert in one or two things. He's kind of across the board. You heard the expression of jack of all trades, a master of none. Well, he's a master of all trades. So we're going to let Dr. Forte tell you a little bit about himself, and then we'll get into the interview. Doc?
Yes, I'm Dr. Leonard Forte. Parents are Rochester and Annie Mae Forte. They're from Arkansas. I'm the seventh son.
Wow.
Parents had 16 children.
16.
Yeah, and I was
middle, huh?
in the middle and
Wow.
was blessed to be born into the world on a prayer. Mother was praying, and Lord knows she had the nurse tap her, said, "You have a baby boy," while she was caught up in prayer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Look
so
at
that's
God
good.
work.
Yes.
That is wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
So how many boys, how many girls?
7 boys, yes,
Oh, wow.
and 5 girls are still living.
Oh, really?
Mhm.
That's a blessing. Are you the spoiled one? Or you the
Uh,
kind of the groundkeeper? You the one that keeps it kind of level?
Well, I'm more of the one to balance, keep the family actively involved
Okay.
with family fellowship.
Usually in the middle, that's the one that's the stable, the balance of the family. That's great.
Yes.
Now, where did you grow up?
Actually, I grew up in the south side of Chicago in Morgan Park.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Morgan Park. Went to Morgan Park High School.
Great school.
And left there and went to Mendel for a year.
Okay, the old Mendel.
Right.
The old Mendel sets.
Yeah, those were
we
some
party
good
at
sets.
Mendel back in the day, man. That was a good thing.
Yes, and then went on to college and received 1 bachelor's, 2 masters, and my doctorate degree.
Wow.
And been traveling and ministering for a number of years.
Got a lot of meat on that brain, don't you?
Oh, yes,
That's a blessing.
15 years of college,
Yeah,
to be exact.
wow.
Yeah.
It's all worth it. It's all worth it.
To God be the glory.
Did you have many role models when you were coming up? Who did you look to? Who did you look up to? And who were the people that kind of guided you? I hear you talking about your educational background and where you grew up. Were there somebody in particular, whether it's a family member, a neighborhood person, a clergy, a administrator, a educator, somebody that you really looked up to and say, hey, I want to pattern myself after that person, or I want to look to that person to see if there's something I could be interested in, and kind of set the framework so that you didn't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel, but you kind of patterned your life or your direction after someone? Did you have anybody in your life?
Yes, my father was my main mentor. He was a great role model, a great mentor. And also Dr. Curtis Smith, he was my godfather. He was the type of gentleman that believed in hard work and education, as well as my father. And Dr. Smith, he mentored me through my master's degree and my doctorate degree. And he was the dean at Concordia University for a number of years. So I had about 5 positive role models that I could pattern myself after.
And that's one of the things that's interesting now. We see our young, especially our young Black males, they're looking for those role models. And unfortunately, they tend to look outside of the community. They look at folks that are famous or live in this glamorous world of the rap artists or the athletes or the musicians. And they look at those folks for leadership. But if you look right outside your door, you got folks that get up every morning and go to work and things of that nature. It was a little different when we were coming up because the mailman lived in our community, the police officer, the school teacher, doctors, lawyers, people of all arenas. And we had some folks to really kind of grab us up and show us what it was like to be a man, and show us what it was like to be a responsible adult. When you were coming up, the gentleman that you mentioned, and of course your father, did they cuff you? And did they embrace you and kind of showed you the way to go and the way to do these things?
Yes, my dad, he was very close to all of us, and any questions we had as far as life is concerned, he would sit us down and talk to us as a father. And my godfather, Dr. Curtis Smith, He was my mentor on the educational intellectual side. He had his master's, his doctorate degree, and he was in charge of the doctorate program at Nova Southeastern University, as well as the one at Concordia University. He was the dean at Concordia.
Great, great. So let's jump into education. What are your thoughts about the education system as a whole right now? I know we have a lot of issues concerning proper education, uh, disparity in education, so that you look at schools on the North Shore or some of these private schools, or not even private schools, but these elite schools that you have to have a certain address or have a written note to get in or some kind of pre-approved sanction in order to be a part of these schools. What are your thoughts on that versus just your local neighborhood schools, which we all went to, which was down the block from our homes, and now you have to have a pool or some kind of random drawing to get into specific schools. Do you have any thoughts about that, Doctor?
Yes, when you think in terms of education, and you mentioned disparity, far as some schools having a number of computers, some of them not having computers at all, and some students are having more textbooks versus other schools, they only have a few textbooks. That's a major concern. When you think in terms of Public Law 94-142, every child is entitled to a free and appropriate education. A lot of times that's not literally happening in certain schools and school districts. Some children are deprived.
Well, why is that? If and is it 94 142 Public
94.
Law 194 142? If that is the law, why is there such a disparity between districts, locations? Of course, obviously, the impoverished areas seem to get the short end of the stick. They get the lesser educational aspects. They also get maybe not the top tier educators, or they don't get the quality equipment, books, computers, and things of that nature, even the access to technology. Why do you think that's the case?
Oh, that's the case for many reasons. Just to name a few, a lot of times the money is not in the local school district. For example, Chicago Public Schools is District 299. They're having some difficulties with financial levels of money in different areas, as far as school supplies, schools, books. Some of the teachers get pink slips, etc. And it's because the money is not in that particular school district. You go to Winnetka, you go to New Trier, they have a tremendous amount of extra money in those districts. Lake
Is
Forest.
that based on taxes and income or median income or things of that nature?
It's based on taxes. It's based on the community. It's based on how wealthy the community is. If you have a whole community full of people that's making 400, 500 a year versus a community where people are making 40, 50, 60,000 a year. And in the North Shore, a lot of those communities are extremely wealthy and rich, and they have extra money to donate to the school district.
It just doesn't seem fair. And because of your geography or your address, you're penalized without a stellar education, which is the privilege and the right of every youngster. And so, what do? Youngsters, they come around and they don't have that quality education, and they don't get it at the beginning, and then it kind of there's a snowball effect where they get disenchanted with school, they get bored with school, they get disinterested in school, and so now, rather than going to school, they do everything to go away from school. And if they go to school, they don't go to the school. They go at the school, through the school, around the school, in front of the school, but they don't actually go into the classes. What can we do about that? What's needed in order to appropriately proportion the money? I know under the federal guidelines and even the state guidelines, and that's a whole nother sermon dealing with the state finances, but there should be some mechanism in place that allows an even proportion of the monies to be given to, I don't care if it's low income areas, but a quality education. Computers are computers. In this technological age, they need the computers, they need the resources, they need the books, they need the technology, they need the vocational programs. And it seems like the more we evolve as a society, the less humane we become in our systems of education and the core values of what youngsters or people at large are needed. What's your thought on what we need to do to make this better?
When you think in terms of making our educational system much better, one, if the money was distributed to all of the school districts equally, and thinking in terms of the computers, if all of the underprivileged schools got computers, that would be a great help. And also, if they had role models in every school, like they have in some of the elite schools, that would be a tremendous help as well.
Okay, because I notice we talk about money and finances, and that becomes a barrier, obviously, as the world runs on finance. The issue and the concern is that you look at some schools where they have the Gates Foundation that donate computers and they donate resources and they donate money and they donate time and energy, and all the efforts are geared to certain areas. Do you have any idea how local schools get involved in those things, or do they have to submit some type of grant or some type of proposal, or does it filter up to the Board of Education or the school board or the local school board or the state board of education or even the national office of public education, for lack of a better understanding?
Yes, many of the schools are funded and they can get a number of grants from different foundations, but there's a process involved. Every school district, they have to apply for the grants. Once they apply for the grants, they'll be reviewed by a committee and an organization that reads the different grants and decide if they're going to approve the grant or they're not going to approve it. So it's a whole process. In order to get those extra dollars from the Gates Foundation, you have to apply. You have to reach out to those organizations. And a lot of times they have literally hired grant writers for different school districts. They have exclusively put a person on their staff just to write grant to bring more dollars into the schools.
That's actually their occupation. They are hired grant writers in order to have more of a professional approach to it and garner more success, as opposed to someone that was a novice just sitting there writing a grant, which probably won't even get looked at. You in turn engage the services of somebody whose career or their job is actually to sit down and professionally write the grant, put the grant together, submit the grant. And they know all of how that whole system works.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yes. Just very important. Yes.
What do you think about the upcoming or the pending, or not so much depending, but maybe the reality of a potential teacher strike? I know the teachers are fighting for some things. You mentioned a while ago that some teachers were laid off and some other CPS staff were laid off based on budget cuts. I know the issue with Springfield, funding the educational system here in Chicago and then making it a proportionate distribution throughout the state, such as there are in other less affluent or more rural areas of the state, or more areas that are even killed, so to speak. The disbursement of finances as it relates to the Chicago public schools seems to be a big hindrance in what we can do with the schools, what we can do with the educators, as well as the staff at large. What are your thoughts about the potential of a strike? I know you've been both online, but you've also been an administrator in the system and know the ins and outs of what it takes to make a school run and more efficiently, but also make a school run where it's going to be in the best interest of the youth. So what's your thoughts on the potential strike?
Well, my thoughts about a strike, I think, is going to only hurt our children. When you think in terms of our children being educated, if the teachers are on strike for a number of days and or weeks, the children are not being educated. So when you think about a strike, the teachers, they're fighting for their rights. They're fighting for their benefits, to keep their money going into their pension, to keep all of their different benefits that they applied for when they were hired. But on the other end, they're fighting for their rights, but the children are losing out on their rights to a free and appropriate education.
Sure. And I know the teachers union were talking about the not only were they not looking to get an increase or an annual increase or cost of living increase or whatever that you call it, but they were actually talking about doing some type of pay cut or reduction in pay. And that doesn't sit well with a lot of teachers. And I've talked to teachers throughout the Chicagoland area that are very upset about that. And they want to know, in society, we tend to pay lawyers, doctors, and other professions professionals at a higher degree than we do our educators. And these are the ones that teach our children. These are the first, outside of the household, these are the first interactions that youth have or youngsters have. They have it with the teachers, and not to take that seriously. A lot of educators have told me that they're very concerned about that, because now the teachers are looking at other avenues and looking at other resources to say, maybe, for the headaches, for the frustration, because I'm a babysitter, I'm a teacher, I'm a nurse, I'm an educator. I do all of these things for these youth and these children, but yet I'm not respected in a manner that is conducive to molding the minds or molding the character or molding the direction of a young person. And I know you have a deep affinity for the teachers. You have a deep heart for the youth and the youngsters. And from an administrative standpoint, what do you tell the teachers when you're trying to keep them motivated, trying to keep them inspired, trying to keep them uplifted, trying to keep them engaged, and also trying to keep them interested in the craft? What do you tell a teacher?
Specifically, what I would tell my teachers, that we have to remember our focus and the reason we went to school to become educators and/or administrators, and that was to reach out and educate our young people. And I always tried to motivate them to stay focused on the importance of getting an education. And it's important that our youth are educated so we have a much better society in the future. So I would always use that as one of my motivational strategies. And if the children are not educated, society is at a standstill, so we have to keep them educated.
Right. Because I've read a statistic that stated, and I'm not sure who it was, and I can't quote them at this moment, where they're saying we're raising a group of youth, a group of youngsters that are going to be less literate for the first time than their parents. Each generation has become more literate than the generation prior to them, but now we seem to have a decline. Where is it attributed to the computers? Is it attributed to the social media, the texting, the Facebook, and all of those other entities where you don't have to use proper grammar, you don't have to use those things that we grew accustomed to? Cursive writing is pretty much non-existent and existent anymore. Certain things that we prided ourselves on when we were coming up or were key staples in the educational system are no longer being used. Computers are thinking for our children in some instances, although, the mind is being elevated and technology does have a part. Do you feel that technology in some way can handicap our youngsters so that they're not able to compete globally? If you look at China, you look at Asia and India and other continents where they're focusing more on mathematics and things of that nature, are we at a disadvantage because we rely a little more on social media and things of that nature? Or should we look more to incorporate the social media and some of those things with the educational aspect of the learning experience?
I think what you just said, as far as incorporating the technology with the educational learning experience, would be the solution, because we're living in a society where technology is prevalent and it's constantly changing. Literally speaking, if children would balance reading a book, still working with their technology and computers. So I think in terms of them having a total balance in society, because if the technology breaks down, a young lady and or a gentleman will know how to read a textbook. They know how to do the math 5 times 5. They'll know it's 25. They won't have to rely on a computer or a calculator to do that. So I think if they merge the two and incorporate.
It's real interesting that you say that. Years ago when you go to the grocery store, they had to actually physically add things up. Now, if it's not keyed in on the keyboard or the cash register, or whatever you call that thing, or the scanner, they can't do it. They have to sit there,
Absolutely.
We knew how to count our pennies. Number one, because that's all we had were pennies, but also the aspect of being able to, in your head, pop it up, because we could go to our multiplication tables. You remember you couldn't transfer from one grade to the other until you recited the multiplication table, and you had to know all of those things. Granted, it was by memory most of the time, but still, you can see in your mind, you're still able to calculate those things in your mind and regurgitate those. And so now I think sometimes we do a disadvantage to our youngsters, not giving them those core values. I remember when calculators came out, we thought they were the greatest thing, but we were not allowed to use calculators in the classroom. We had to add it up. We could check our work after it was returned to us, and we may have gotten a bad grade or something, but calculator was then used for that. And then there was a very little demand or very little use at that time. I want to go back to when we were talking about the disparity between some of the upper echelon communities and the impoverished communities or the local communities in Chicago. What is the core difference, besides maybe the financial aspect, which you alluded to earlier and you went into detail about? The core differences in suburban schools, let's go North Shore versus Inglewood in Chicago, or Lawndale or North Lawndale, or the Roseland area, some of the Auburn, Gresham, or some of those areas where the educational opportunities are not as substantial as they may be in some of those communities. What do you think are some of the key or the main reasons or the main disparities between the two?
Well, some are, for example, there are a lot of single family homes. If you think in terms of some of the very successful communities, they have a father in their home and they have a mother there in the family. They sit down and they have family dinner, and they don't have an influx of drugs versus some of our neighborhoods. They have a lot of drugs and they have a lot of gangbangers versus another neighborhood. They have a lot of tennis courts and swimming pools in their backyard. So I think the father missing out of the home is one of the contributing factors. And not only that, a lot of wonderful, beautiful single mothers are trying to raise children on their own. And the other major contributing factor, we have a lot of babies, unfortunately, they're drug babies, and they were born into the world with some kind of disability versus another child that was born into a healthy environment. So those are just a few that come to mind.
So let's go with the drug babies. That creates a whole new set of dynamics, because now not only the core educational aspect that you have to address, now you have to address special education, special needs, special circumstances. And if you're not getting the core things for someone that's a healthy child or a healthy youngster, add to that the special needs of youth that are born with autism or have some type of a mental delay or functioning. And now you have a whole new dynamic added to the core value of providing a quality education. So now we look at what's been given, and that's been at minimum. And now we add this other dynamic on top of it, and it's like some of them are born to lose.
And a lot of the other dynamics that come into play, a lot of our Black African American men, they are incarcerated, and a lot of times the prison is set up. They have that new law, 3 strikes and you're out, and that shouldn't be. I believe justice should be justice for all, and that's another contributing factor. Many of our African American men, they may have a misdemeanor or something, and automatically they get a record, and then they continue to go back to court and go to jail. So by the parents being locked up in jail, mainly the fathers, that's a huge part of society that's missing with our youth. And Black boys are looking for role models, as well as the girls are looking for mentors and role models.
Exactly, and you don't see that in the community that much, even when we were coming up.
No.
What happened to vocational programs? When we were coming up years ago, back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, maybe even the 90s, you had vocational programs in the school. You had Chicago Vocational, you had Dunbar, you had Simeon on the south side, you had some of the schools on the west side, Crane, and some of the others that provided a vocational services. And I know technology has changed that, because the careers that you could once do, wood shop and things of that nature, and auto mechanic and some of those other things have changed. The dynamics of what they are and how you do them has changed. You know, you used to be able to work on your vehicle, but now you have to have a computer degree to change the tire almost, or change the oil. And so knowing that, what happened to vocational? And I realized, like I said, it's a technological world now, but now, wouldn't you think that the vocational curriculum would be geared more to the computer programs and things of that nature? Or if they're going to have auto mechanics, they're going to teach them how to work on the computers or the chips or whatever drives our vehicles at this time, and some of those technological advancements that have been made and what used to be hands-on and now are done by machines. What happened to them? Are they non-existent, or am I misinformed? Or do they not exist in the school systems anymore?
Well, what happened based on things that have been shared with me as it relates to the school board, they decided to go in and eliminate a number of the programs due to budget cuts. They had the vocational programs where children that didn't want to take the approach as it relates to becoming an English major or a math specialist, they could look into a vocation and they could work towards that area. But due to budget cuts, from my understanding, they cut the programs out. But your point as it relates to technology, that would be something they can consider incorporating under the vocational umbrella.
And it's ironic to me, Dr. Forte, that when we minimize, eliminated, or discontinue these type of programs, the violence spike. Less programs, more violence. It doesn't take a rocket science or a genius to understand that. It doesn't take a rocket science or genius to understand that these things, there's a correlation between that. Less engagement, more crime. Less interaction, more crime. Less opportunities, more violence. We are in a violent society, but let's be honest. Do the youth, the youngsters have things to do? Are there programs in the school system that allow them to at least get a marketable skill so that they could possibly go out and get a job or get a career? And that's the disservice, I think. And you mentioned it very eloquently, the budget cuts, but they're affecting the ones that need these opportunities the most. I'm not just picking on you. I'm just saying what kind of co-signing on exactly what you said. You mentioned single family homes. We've always had single family homes. We've always had gangs. We've always had drugs in the community. I think these things are generational. You can go now and you can see a mother 15, the grandmother's 28, the great grandmother's 39, the great great grandmother is 60, the great great grandmother is 72. You got 5 or 6 generations that are in a household, and no one is being given that core value or that core instruction of getting training in some type of career or some type of occupation.
Yes.
Okay. What about Head Start? What do you think about Head Start?
Head Start program is extremely important.
We're going to stop. We got a caller, Dr. Forte. This is Jay Jack. You're on Comment Talk on IntellectualRadio.com. How can I help you? Who's calling, first of all?
This is Daryl Jackson.
Hey, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing okay.
Good. What can we do for you, sir?
Just want to make a comment on the issue you guys were talking about with the vocational training.
Yes.
Speaking as a graduate of the Chicago Vocational High School back in the 80s.
Oh, okay.
I want to say that, and now I work in trades. I have worked in trades. I work for basically a Fortune 500 company right now.
Okay.
It seems to me that if they want to get people out of the situations they're in, they should reinstitute vocational training.
I agree.
Because let's face it, you have plumbers. You cannot, there's been, I don't want to say large advances. There haven't been really large advances in plumbing, nor electricians. It's still basically the same thing.
So you're saying you still have to have a human factor in that?
Exactly. There's
Correct.
no way to computerize, bring in, like, you can't do it from home.
Right.
Certain jobs you just can't do from home. And you have to have a person on site to do those jobs, and that's the same thing with carpenters, electricians, plumbers.
Oh, yeah.
All these jobs are beneficial to society, and someone needs to do them. And why not get some of the youth and some of these schools to help us achieve that?
Yeah. So while I got you on, Daryl, what do you think is the biggest barrier to providing those services? As you said, you back in the 80s, you were a product of a vocational high school, and those classes were made afforded to you. And as I was talking to Dr. Forte, we were talking about, we had gangs back then. We had single parent households back then. We had drugs in the community, and we even had generational poverty. But now, because of the lack of or the investment in the community, we tend to have more violence and things of that nature. Do you think that's a direct correlation between the lack of those type of programmatic systems in the school district?
I want to say yes and no. I think it's a proliferation of the, not just saying the single family homes, but the age of the parents.
Okay, that's a good point. Good point. Very good point. Well, thank you, sir. Any other comments before I let you go?
Enjoy your show.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Daryl. Thanks.
Please tune in as often as you can. We're here every Monday at 3 o'clock. Thanks again. Have a great day.
I will. Thank you.
Goodbye.
All right.
That was very interesting, Dr. Forte.
Yes, sir.
A product of Chicago vocational school system, saying that they had all of these programs. And I didn't think about plumbers and electricians and things that occupations of that nature. Where
even photographers, they had photography as well.
Yeah, and you need a hands-on approach to take care of those things. You know, you can't phone in plumbing.
Exactly.
You got to come in there, and they're going to charge an arm and leg, but that's okay. But they're going to be the ones that come in and actually provide that service. And so that's a good thing to realize, that even though they eliminate these things, there's still a need for these type of occupations. And I was in the juvenile justice system as an administrator for a number of years, as well as the child welfare system for a number of years. And the vast majority of the youngsters, they want some money, but they're willing to do something for it. You know, it's okay to have a certificate, but when I get a certificate, are you going to give me a job? Are you going to give me an opportunity to make a living? Then that eliminates some of those bad options, because now there's some good options. And then I start feeling good about myself, and I expand that to my community, my younger siblings, or even my mom or my dad in my household. And now we're feeling good, and now it becomes contagious, and everybody wants to be a part of that. So it's very important that we allow those things to happen. And I thank Daryl for his comments, because it gives us a different and a fresh perspective. I want to jump into something. What do you think about Head Start? How effective is a Head Start program, if they even still call it Head Start, where I think it's pre-K now, or they may have some quote unquote fancy terminology for it? Is that an effective use of time for a youngster getting involved in the educational system at such a young age? Because youth and children are so smart these days. You know, the old expression, they've been here before. They come out and they know their ABCs before they become a year old. They can recite some things. So getting them in an educational environment at an early age, do you think that's appropriate, or do you think it's effective?
Yes, it's very effective, I think, because if a child learns how to use their motor skills and how to interact with other children and how to just begin to communicate at an early age, from the age, I believe it's 1 to 5, is a very critical age for children as it relates to their development. And at the age of 5, they're ready to move on into kindergarten and/or depending on how advanced they are, to first grade. So if they miss out on the foundation, they are going into kindergarten, first grade without those
at a deficit.
Exactly. They would have a major deficit.
Now, is Head Start, is that afforded to every youth? And I'm going back to the, what is it, 94-142? Is that part of the 94-142 legislation?
Yes, that falls under that umbrella. From the age of birth to the age of 21, everyone is entitled to a free and appropriate education. Public Law 94-142. Yes.
Public law. Okay, I got it. Okay, so we talked about Head Start, pre-K. What's your thoughts on charter schools? I know there's been a lot of conversation about it. There's some pros and cons, that people on both sides of the fence for it and some against it. They're saying that charter schools tend to take away from the government's financial obligations to specific schools in certain areas, where it used to be a time where your community high school or your community elementary school or things of that nature, the funds were earmarked just for that specific location in your community based on censuses and all of those things. What are your thoughts on, number one, can you kind of explain to us what a charter school is, and what is a charter school versus a regular public school? And also, what's the plus and minuses of both? And if there's a plus and minus for both, what do you recommend a parent do to research which one would be more beneficial to the youth? I know I threw a lot of questions out there.
Oh, that's
Feel
fine.
free to ask me again, Al.
Yes, the difference in a regular educational setting under the State Board of Education is that they have specific guidelines they have to follow. If you're going to be a teacher for Chicago Public Schools, you have to have a state license, a state certification in order to be in the classroom, to evaluate a student, to administer tests, etc. Even the administrators have to have their Type 75s. When you think in terms of a charter school,
Type 75.
yes, that's an administrative certification, and then they have other certification for educators.
Okay.
With the charter school specifically, you can have a charter school, and some of the staff, from my understanding and based on some of the research I've done, some of them don't have the educational certification. They have a college degree,
But they're
and
educated in education.
correct, they have a college degree, and a lot of the charter schools, from what I've been told, this is what I've looked into, and I did some research, is that it's ran by corporate America. And the school system is leaning towards bringing on more charter schools versus public schools.
Is that based on economics?
The
Because
funding,
so the funding source is from a corporation versus a publicly funded educational system.
absolutely,
Wow.
yes, yes. There's a difference.
Then there goes a greater
Mhm.
disparity between educational entities. So now if you got a huge corporation that's sponsoring one school or supporting one school or running one school versus, let's for lack of a better word, a mom and pop type organization running
Mhm.
the school that gets the biggest donations or get the biggest funding is going to provide the better service.
Absolutely, yes,
Then we have disparity. Are
correct.
there any type of guidelines or regulations as it relates to running a charter school? Can I just J-Jack go and say, hey, I want to open up a charter school and grab some folks that's fresh out of college and say, teach these youngsters? Are there some criteria or some guidelines that are in effect?
Yes, there are guidelines per the State Board of Education. I was fortunate to stop by the State Board of Education earlier today prior to coming on your radio show. And I was updated and educated as it relates to the charter schools. At least 80% of the staff have to have certification now. There's a flexibility, from my understanding and what I was told, only 20% of the staff is kind of flexible and they can be selected per the administration. So they are making the guidelines a lot stricter for the charter schools.
Do they have like a school board? I know, like Chicago Public Schools, they have a local school board. Do they have any type of governing agent that oversees the day-to-day operations, or even just the way the schools are run, or the hold them accountable? Is there any accountability? Is what I'm asking.
Yes, just as intense as the Chicago Public Schools, charter schools, they have a great level of accountability. When you think in terms of, as far as the grading, as far as the test is concerned, they still have to meet the state standards.
So are they under the guidelines of the Illinois State Board of Education?
Yes, because it's an educational institution, they still have to meet those requirements.
Okay, great. That's really interesting. Thanks for clearing that up.
Mhm.
I've always heard, but now there's another type of school. You got a charter school, alternative. What is the difference between a regular public school, a charter school, and an alternative school?
Well, an alternative school is a school that I've been informed by different institutions where they will allow the child to go to that particular school for a number of reasons. Perhaps the child has a very difficult time in a regular educational setting, so that child is very disruptive. That particular student that created a number of problems, and/or if that student, for example, brought a weapon to school, a gun, you are no longer enrolled in the regular school setting based on the state. You can go to an alternative school. So they do that a lot of times to diffuse a lot of the negative energy and a lot of the negative problems that would come to a charter school and/or a regular school. So they have an alternative school. Behavior,
So
academics.
literally, if someone is at an alternative school, have they in essence been expelled from the regular school system?
In some cases, they've been expelled. In some cases, every situation is different. It's a variety of reasons why they were sent to the alternative school.
Okay. Are there a lot of alternative schools in the Chicagoland area, to your knowledge?
The exact number, I'm not sure. I don't think it's as many as it used to be because they had a new policy implemented where the children are not being suspended as much and they are keeping them in the school. So before they were suspended and they were allowed to go before an adjudicator, had a hearing, and then based on the hearing, they would send them to an alternative school. But with all the budget cuts, I was told by some colleagues and some research that I've done that is not as many charters, as many alternative schools
Okay.
as it used to be.
Does the school system still institute the zero tolerance factor in schools, or is that just for specific issues?
Oh, that zero tolerance factor, I think it's there, but it's not implemented because you have to be flexible. It's not one size fit all. So they kind of did away with a lot of the zero tolerance.
Yeah, because I thought, there were a lot of, I don't know if they're lawsuits, but there were a lot of issues with youth or youngsters being held or kicked out or dismissed or detained or whatever the case may be based on the zero tolerance process. And so I'm glad to see that they're looking more into that and that they don't utilize that as much. Are public school children being prepared for college? Are they given the tools that they need in order to be a successful college student? Or are they just kind of falling in where they fit in or getting what they can and hoping for the best? When you look at some of the I guess alternative schools or charter school like the one in Inglewood, I can't recall the name of it, where 99.9% of their youth, probably 100%, are accepted to a college, and they're in the heart of Inglewood. And they're being prepared for college. And then you look at some of the other schools that don't have that track record, and the dropout rate for the rate of youngsters not going to higher education is slim and none. Are they being prepared? Is the system designed to prepare youngsters to go to college, or for that matter, to go on to maybe some type of trade school? Are they being adequately equipped?
Yes, I believe they are being adequately equipped when you think in terms of some of the schools. For example, I'm just thinking in terms of Dr. Blonding Davis. She has a phenomenal 5-star charter school in Matson. And her students, they graduate and they go on to colleges and universities. There are a number of charter schools that are successful. Jones Commercial College Prep School, Northside College Prep Schools. So many schools are extremely successful. Then you have some schools that it's not as successful as others, and they end up going to junior colleges, some of those students that can't quite make it to the 4-year university.
You mentioned Jones.
Yes.
And you mentioned
Northside College Prep.
And then you mentioned one more.
The charter school in Matson. The name escapes me.
Are those schools where you have to be accepted? Is there like a draw or some type of pool? Because I look at like the Whitney Youngs of the world, the Lane Techs, things of that are public schools, but they don't allow everybody in. It's not like if anybody can just go and register at those schools. There's a limited enrollment. The Bronzeville Academy, the Walter Payton School, some of those higher end schools that provide a stellar education, but they're so limited in who they allow. Now my question goes back to what we originally talked about. They are Chicago public schools, correct?
Yes.
Why can't the neighborhood school provide the same stellar and quality education as those schools we just named? Because they're in someone's neighborhood as well. And that's one of my disappointments in the system, that if you can do that in this area or this school, it seems like once the median income goes up or gentrification is alive and well in certain communities, the school system automatically, look at King High School in the hood for many years. Now that gentrification is alive and well, and Brownsville is flourishing, and the overflow for those communities is happening. Now those schools are select enrollment schools. So, what's your thought about that?
Well, many times you have to look into the students in the student body. Sometimes you have AP students, advanced placement students. Sometimes you have students with a very high GPA. And a lot of times they are so advanced till they get bored sitting in a regular classroom. They need to be in advanced class, an honors class, an advanced placement class, and or they need to be in a school where they are teaching 1 or 2 years ahead. For example, if you're a freshman, you may be taught some sophomore and junior classes because of their intellectual level. And a lot of times you have to meet the children where they're at. Some children start off in school extremely brilliant, super intelligent, 1 or 2 years ahead, advanced as far as their education. So those schools are selected enrollment to maintain that momentum and to maintain that level of challenge, because a super intelligent child, if you put them in a school that's not moving on their level, that child bored, frustrated, and all kind of factors can set in. Exactly.
Sure.
Not listening, et cetera, paying attention.
And I've known many that have done that. And the brightest youngster gets bored, they start getting disinterested. And after a while, they create issues, and then they're
You're right.
non-existent in the school.
Absolutely right.
That's absolutely correct. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about, I want to talk about hope for the youngsters. I don't want it to be painted as doom and gloom, but I want it to be as realistic as possible in our conversation as relates to the educational system. There's a lot of work to do, but there's also some good things that are coming out of this. We mentioned some of these select enrollment schools and some of the other schools that are getting better, and hopefully the reinvestment in education, the reinvestment in our youngsters, the reinvestment in the communities will allow for a better education for our youngsters, but also a more informed education, but also an education that's going to provide a level of success, a bright future for our youngsters. What can parents do? How can parents get involved? What do they need to know? What do they need to do as a parent? If you could say something to a parent, the number 1, 2, or 3 things that the parent could do, what would you say?
Number one, I would definitely encourage parents to have a very strong relationship with all of your children's teachers. Know what's going on, know what your students, what your child has to do that particular week as far as their homework assignments. Get involved with a number of positive organizations, be it with the Kappa brothers, be it with the Alphas, or if you know some sororities, AKAs, they have a lot of mentoring programs, the Deltas. Also, they have the Michael Jordan Foundation. A lot of the YMCA still have great programs. And also a lot of the churches, they have a number of positive programs for the youth. So there are a lot of options parents can consider. But most importantly, the parent should literally get a hands-on approach to everything their child is doing as it relates to their academics in school.
How do they do that? How do they get that information? Now, we just mentioned about, as I call it, Daryl called in, he said, it's about the age. A lot of parents these days are not as informed as they used to be. They're not as involved. They don't know where to get a start. What would be your first step if you were guiding a parent as an administrator? And I'm sure you've dealt with parents all the time who come in and just say, why can't Johnny do this? What can I do to help? You have just as many never come in, don't even know where the first steps are. What would be your suggestion or your directive or just your words of wisdom to them to seek that information?
I would encourage all parents to check with the school administration. The school administrators, they have a number of resources. Not only does the school administrator has resources, every school district has a wealth of resources that can help our children with after school programs. And also you can look into just going on the internet, look into Google and checking what's on the internet, check with your alderman. And also the alderman knows a lot of youth programs. Many of the churches have youth programs. So I would encourage parents to do a lot of reaching out to different organizations, but I would start with their local school, asking, you, for example, the principal, what programs do you have for the summer and after school and throughout the school year?
So start off with the school.
Yeah.
And hopefully, if the school is engaged or invested in the well-being of the youngster or the youth or the child or the kid, whatever you want to call them, they'll be in a position to afford them an opportunity to present some information to them that can help them. And hopefully they don't leave them. You know, a lot of folks need a handheld. They need to be walked through because it's a nervous and it's a frustrating system. Once you come across a brick wall, you may get discouraged and not want to deal with it anymore. And so I do appreciate that bit of information, and I hope those of us who are listening take heed to that so that when you do come across those situations, you'll be able to better arm yourself with the tools you need to provide a quality education for your youngster. And I must say, if you don't feel your youngster is operating at maximum potential, as Dr. Forte said, you need to know the teacher, you need to know the principal, you need to know the administrators, you need to know everybody that's involved in the educational aspects of your child's life. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. Be that parent that goes up there every day. Be that parent that, if you can, I know folks work, I know that you got other children, you got other responsibilities, but as much as you can, if you can't be there, see if you have a surrogate or someone that can be there for you. Get together with other parents, create a parent environment or a parent group that you can discuss those things. And even if you don't know, everybody starts from square one. So it's very important that, you know, a lot of folks are going through the same issues and have the same challenges as you do. And so we just encourage you to talk to people, and you'd be surprised that you're not on an island, you're not alone. Dr. Forte, it's been a pleasure. Yes. Thank you so much for being here. You're welcome. Like I said, you're one of my experts now, so I'm going to be calling you, man. And
thanks so much for having me on the show.
We're going to talk about your other career. We're going to talk about gospel music the next time you come down, and you're going to bring a couple of folks down with you that are going to allow us to have some fun.
Yes.
So we appreciate you. Thank you. God bless you. That's all we got today, guys. We'll see you next week. This is Jay Jack on IntellectualRadio.com. You've been tuned in to Common Talk. We're out.